Hello again, another update on Cybersurfer for you. There's a new demo out, I hope you go and check it out. There's a link in the description. Before I get into what's new, let's recap the problems from last time. Firstly, the player handling was still not where I wanted it to be. It was functional, but still didn't feel quite right. The second issue was the animations. They were just broken across the board. The third thing I wanted to work on was adding tricks. Player handling. Semi-good news on that front. I finally implemented a PID system. But before I continue, I should say that it isn't completely my own code. It is based off another person's PID controller from a video they did on it. I do not follow their video exactly, however, as I will get into later. Previously, the player handling was managed by a couple of quaternion rotations that would keep the player rigidly close to the track spline's direction of travel. But this meant that when going around corners there wasn't really much of a slide or course correction. In other words, it didn't look believable. After a lot of trial and error, I started to think that a PID-driven solution wouldn't actually work. So I looked further into it and found out about PD systems, which is basically the same thing but without the corrective adjustment. But I found the results to be lacking, so I quickly ditched it. However, it did highlight a problem. Gimbal lock was affecting it. Gimbal lock, if you're unfamiliar, is when two or more Euler axes conflict with each other. In Unity, if you, for example, set the x-axis rotation of an object to 90 degrees, you notice that the y and z axes will behave in the same way if you try and adjust their value. In my particular case, when the player would go up a vertical bit of track, they would start moving erratically, plus some odd movement involving the player rotating under the ground. This led to the question, how do I do quaternion rotations with a PID system? Well, there is an add-on for it, which I did not buy, and neither should you. What I actually did was create another invisible game object, which I will refer to as a proxy. This proxy would be rotated to the position I want the player to be in, and then I calculate the difference of the angle on each axis between the player's current rotation and the proxy's rotation. Specifically the yaw, roll, and pitch angles. I do this using the signed angle of the vector-free class and passing the transform directions of both objects into it. Once I have the angles, I pass those into the PID system to get the adjustment angles out, and then I adjust the yaw of the player via rigidbody.addTorque. And for the roll and pitch, I use quaternion.lerp. This is because I have the x and z axis frozen on the player's rigid body to stop it from falling over all the time. The PID system wasn't the only change to the player handling. I also changed how the player reacts to sloped surfaces and added trajectory prediction. Previously, when the player would go on the sloped sides of the track, they would stay mostly upright. This was incorrect behavior. Furthermore, landing on a sloped surface looked wrong. Games often adjust your character's rotation to make landing on such surfaces smoother, so I decided to add that in myself. I use a line renderer and draw a projected path based on physics calculations and check to see if it is colliding with the surface via a raycast. If it does hit, then I set the rotation of the player to the normal of the raycast hit. However, it does this by lerping between the current and landing rotations using the percentage of distance traveled between the last grounded position and the landing position. Although not perfect, it does improve the general feeling of landing on non-flat terrain and provides better visual feedback. Overall, the player handling has been improved somewhat, but there are still things to do. The most annoying thing I would love to get rid of is the need for PID tweaking. There is a way of automating it, but I need to do more research into how to implement it. Before I get into the meat of the new trick system, let's talk about the state of the animations from last time. In short, they were busted, big time. Feet going through the board, hands not getting the correct placement, and some animations didn't play properly at all. The reason for all this jank? Simply put, I hadn't built the rig correctly. Previously, the character and the board were separate. The character had its rig and was a child object of the board. The board was controlled by code. But because of that, the rig never interacted with it properly. So I redid the rig with an additional bone for the board in the Rigify setup. After that, I decided to reanimate all the basic animations from scratch. The results were considerably improved. Now, onto the tricks themselves. I've got 3 lists of grab tricks, a left-hand grab set, a right-hand one, and both hands. I ended up revising this list about 3 times due to getting mixed up between regular and goofy stances, as well as getting bad information on what the tricks are actually called. As it turns out, some tricks have multiple names. This made finding reference videos more of a challenge than it needed to be. But I persevered, and I got 24 grabs animated. The question then became, what's the best way to implement them? I initially tried using a blend tree, which allowed me to easily change between them based on the direction of the stick. But the transitions were more sudden than I originally expected, and moving the right stick to a position between 2 tricks would cause an odd halfway animation that looked completely broken. I attempted to build my own system, but it turned into a spaghettified mess that was difficult to work with for even one animation, let alone hooking them all up together in it. And it didn't even work in the end anyway. So I went back to the blend tree method. As problematic as it was, at least it mostly worked for what I currently need. Ultimately, I think I want a system as simple as the blend tree, but without the in-between halfway animations. More picking one animation or the other once it crosses a certain threshold. One last thing on the trick system. Currently, doing a trick will rotate the player in the same direction as the trick input. I'm going to move the rotation input to the left stick in the future, but this will mean that adjusting the player's position in mid-air will either have to be removed, or live with the silliness of spinning in the air while also moving side to side. In all fairness, the Tony Hawk games do the latter, but I don't know if it's what I want to do. And now for a roundup of all the other features and changes. I have added a 4th level to the demo. It's not fully complete, it requires some more things that I haven't built yet. It serves mostly as an example of being a level that focuses on the rail grinding mechanics. I'll likely add more to it once I start working on other mechanics. An issue with the previous build of the game that I didn't notice at the time was that when the left and right sides of the track were raised for a corner, they were not the same height. The right side would always be lower. I've since corrected this, along with other minor adjustments. Gravity has been adjusted. This was actually part of the previously mentioned player behavior when on a sloped surface like the sides of the track. I now calculate a deviation between the player's up vector and the track spline's up vector at the point on the spline that the player is on. If there is a significant deviation, I use project on plane to manipulate the gravity direction to give the illusion that the player is being pulled back down the slope that they're on. Additionally, when the player is no longer grounded, it uses the track's up vector at the last point they were grounded as the gravity direction. This can lead to some very interesting physics behavior, which I am definitely going to take advantage of for secrets and shortcuts. Another thing I added while messing around with gravity and rotations was resetting the player's position after they fall into the void. It's a fairly simple addition. The trajectory calculation has an endpoint. If that endpoint isn't hitting anything for a period of about 5 seconds, you'll get reset back to the checkpoint. I added this after noticing in the last demo that multiple people seemingly forgot the game had a reset button, and thought that they had soft-locked themselves after falling into the void. During my PID testing phase, I decided to test out an idea that I've been simmering on for a bit, which is, what if I ditched the track and made a big map that the player can move around in? However, they're still locked to a spline for movement. In short, it didn't look or feel great to play. It also highlighted an issue with the code where intersecting paths, or paths that are close to each other, would wildly pivot the player's direction of travel. It's fine on a track, but with an open map, it would be problematic. If I was going to have an open map level, I would likely need a different player handling model. But an interesting test nonetheless. It reminded me of Cybersurfer a bit. I delved more into Cinemachine, and set up a custom blend asset that gives me more control over camera transitions. Furthermore, experimenting with different camera angles got me thinking about controls. In level 4, the first part of the level puts the camera in front of the player facing towards them. I found that the default controls felt off when I did this, so I tried to implement camera relative controls. For that particular example, it worked well, where left was always the camera's left. But once I started experimenting with other viewpoints, such as side-on or top-down, the controls started going haywire, inverting and then uninverting itself at random. I eventually ditched it in favor of manually setting the movement to be inverted when the camera transitions via triggers on the map. Jumping between rails now spins the player in the air. It's a bit of a reference to both how Sonic and Ratchet & Clank do it. That said, my implementation doesn't look all that great. I will probably use a dedicated animation to replace it. I updated the main menu with a background so it's no longer just a white screen. I made it in Blender using geometry nodes, and then rendered it using an equirectangular camera. It's not the final form by any means, but it's better than a blank screen. Lastly, I remade the button icons for the controls display using a vector image software called Inkscape. They're still placeholders, but they're higher resolution than the originals. And yes, I am aware that the trick list menu only features controller inputs. I'll get around to fixing that eventually. I'm unhappy with the rate of progress on the project. I was hoping to be in early access this year, but with the content I currently have and what is likely to get done in the original time frame I intended, I don't think that's an achievable goal. The good news, at least, is that progress is steady and things are starting to come together. With all that said, there is a reason why I haven't been able to work on the game as much as I'd like. That reason being that I started yet another project. However, I'm making a separate video on that, which you'll see soon after this video, maybe a week or two. So look forward to that. Let's end on the feedback from the demo and where the project is going next, starting with the feedback. Responses to the new player handling seem mostly positive. Some people did complain that it didn't feel right or that it wasn't weighty enough. There were also complaints about the speed and momentum of the player character, mostly saying that they felt like they were losing speed. On that point, I do understand wanting to go faster, but the original idea of the game was more about obstacle avoidance and navigating the tracks rather than just pure speed. That said, I do agree that the game is a little slow in places. Not helping that is the downtime between sections. These levels are not fully indicative of what I have planned, and there are missing features. As such, they're a bit empty. I will work on improving that as I add more features and things to them. There was one complaint about getting reset back to the checkpoint while airborne, despite them feeling that they did have a place to land. I will give a better indicator to the landing trajectory mechanic that shows you if you're actually colliding with the track or not. I suspect this complaint might have something to do with the beginning of the rail section in level 4. I did not get any complaints about the controller controls, but I did get some about the keyboard controls. In fairness, I did forget to add additional UI for keyboard controls, notably the trick list menu, but I suspect that the button layout may not be all that comfortable to use either. I need to get more feedback and do additional testing on alternate layouts. I got a suggestion to add tricks that you can do on the ground. Stuff like manuals or even some board flips are likely what they're thinking of. It's not an impossible thing to add. Let me know in the comments if it's something you want. The camera transitions were an annoyance for some. The front-facing camera in level 4 and the fast shot for the loop in level 3 in particular. This mechanic is still experimental, but I can clearly see a lot of players had issues with it that caused them to swerve wildly when it occurred, or were unable to see their character properly. I'll make the appropriate adjustments and changes. I will also look into some kind of UI element that highlights the player better when the camera is pulled out to improve visibility generally. With the feedback out the way, what are my priorities and what does the timeline for the project look like now? There are a few small things I would like to do. Letting the player jump off rails and back onto the track. Further experimenting with multiple pathways and branching track design. And I want to fix the weirdness with the blend tree animations for the tricks. Bigger things include remaking the character model. First of all, it isn't mine to begin with. Secondly, the legs are too long compared to the rest of the body. Animating with it leads to a lot of annoying adjustments around those legs because they're so long. Rigify being a bit jank doesn't help either. Also, the weight painting is broken for the head. I need more levels for the game. I want to get up to 10 levels before I feel comfortable putting this in early access. And that includes a boss level. I have an idea for the first boss, it's just a matter of implementation. I would like to get some sound into the game. Music is also a big part of it, but I think I'll get someone to do that. Last time I made my own music, it didn't go well. Also, I need a title for the game. I only gave it the name Cybersurfer because of another project I was working on that shared some assets with it called Sandsurfer. But it really needs its own identity that fully encapsulates the original premise that the game is about. You know, hacking, networks, corporate and government control of data, etc. But in the weird movie-like hacking is cool type of way. Admittedly, you wouldn't know that's what this game is about considering the in-development state of it. But until I can solidify its style, it's going to be hard to come up with a new name. As for the development timeline at this point, I think early access is going to be a 2026 goal at this point. The second project does not help my productivity. Additionally, I'm going to skip out on 7-day FPS this year. The idea I wanted to do for that is going to require more time than I have. So I'll put that off for another year and focus on this project. As for the next update, you're probably not going to get another video on this until maybe next year. Not to say you're not going to get any videos from this channel. I've got plenty of things I still want to talk about and share. That's everything. Please look forward to the video on the other projects soon. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, I will respond as best I can. If you want to support me, you can do so on Ko-fi. Or, if you want to support this project specifically, or get something for your money, you can check out my itch.io page, where I also sell assets that you can use in your own games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.